This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken with a segment of their Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast. This week, the pair converse about water clarity and how it can impact pond health. K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner continues the show by discussing feedstuff tags. He explains how custom and commercial feed tags can differ. Mike Brouk, K-State Dairy Specialist, ends the show for today as he talks about the strides dairy farmers have made in increasing sustainability and practices they should consider moving forward. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with another episode of K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken's podcast, Fins, Fur, and Feathers.
Well, welcome back to Fins, Fur, and Feathers. I think we've got an aquatics episode up this week. Joe, what do you got for us to talk about?
Yeah, we're going to chat today about water clarity. And so we look out at ponds a lot of times. You know, I talk about how I'm a duck hunter and I'm a fisherman. I like dirty ponds, and I want to talk a little bit about water clarity and what really we want, what goes into that, and why it's important to think about for pond management.
I guess, what is clarity? What's that term referring to when we're talking about a pond?
So what we're talking about with water clarity is how far can light shine down into that water column, and that's going to affect a lot of different things that go on in that pond. And so a lot of people think that they want their water to look like that crystal clear, like what comes out of a fountain, and that may be okay, and it might not be.
Is there an objective way that we might measure how clear water is?
So we like to use something called a Secchi disc, and a Secchi disc is basically just a circle. It's cut up into 4 little quadrants, and they are alternating white and black colors. And so you put that on the end of a rope, and you lower that disc down into the water until you can't see it anymore. And that area where you can't see that disc anymore, that depth, would be the Secchi depth, or the depth where, you know, you lose that sight line. And so you'd measure that in inches. How deep is it? Generally, it's inches. If you have really, really clear water, you might change that up, but we're looking at inches. Our desired Secchi depth is somewhere around 20 inches. Okay, and so we want to get about 20 inches deep and be able to lose clarity. You can think about that with your hand, too. It's not going to be as scientific, but if you put your hand 20 inches underwater, you would want to start losing sight of it for this quote-unquote ideal clarity level. And that's going to be kind of indicative of, you know, we're allowing some sunlight into that pond, and that's important for some reasons. But we're not having it so clear that we run into some other issues like excessive plant growth and things like that. So trying to maintain kind of that 18 to 24 inches, 20 inches is a great kind of target. Some of the things to remember is that, you know, this is going to change daily. It's going to change from morning to evening. It's going to change if a cloud passes by. So thinking about the conditions, and don't get caught up if it's 18, if it's 22, that's all okay.
Why does water clarity matter if we're thinking about pond management?
Sure. Well, 2 different things. A lot of our listeners are agricultural producers, right? And so thinking about water clarity, that's going to be indicative of the water quality. So they do go hand in hand to some degree, and kind of understanding the clarity as it pertains to either irrigation or, you know, having livestock that are ingesting it, drinking from it. So there's going to be some things there that we want to think about. Thinking about other critters, so fish that are growing. If you don't have enough water clarity, the fish are not going to be able to see their prey. And so you're going to have issues with fish growing and the population doing okay. And the opposite of that's true, too. If you have too much water clarity, you might have too many plants that can cause fluctuations in dissolved oxygen levels, for example. And so understanding that what goes into the water clarity and is kind of important. One of the important things to remember with clarity is that turbidity that I mentioned earlier, right? And that turbidity is what's decreasing water clarity. You know, there are a lot of things that can contribute to that. Basically, anything that's floating around in that water is going to increase the turbidity. A lot of what we're thinking about, generally we think about muddiness, right? And so suspended clay, suspended particles. If you go shove a fire hose on the side of a a mud flat, for example, all of that mud's going to get washed up, and that's what happens during a big rain. So you get a lot of sediment washed into different waterways, and that's turbidity. You can have things like phytoplankton, so little single-celled plants that are growing, algae cells that are growing in the water column. Those phytoplankton are really important for small fish that are growing up. And so, those differences in what's creating that turbidity is also important.
What happens if we don't have enough suspended solids or phytoplankton and that kind of stuff in the pond? What happens if it's too clear?
Yeah, and so it can be a good thing to have clear water. And, thinking about just the aesthetics, that might be a benefit. If you're using it primarily for swimming, you might want it to be a little more clear. Clear doesn't always mean that it's better water quality, though, right? And so it doesn't mean it's safer to swim in or anything like that. But some of the things that happen if it gets too clear is that you get a lot of plant growth, and that can tend to take over. One of the issues that you have with that, when you have a lot of plant growth, you can have issues where oxygen is produced during the day, but then it's utilized at night. And so you can have big fluctuations in your oxygen levels, and that can lead to issues like fish kills, where, you have so many plants that are keeping oxygen levels high, but because of that fluctuation during the night, those oxygen levels get low enough that you could have fish kills. If you want to maintain good ecology in your pond, having some suspended particles is really important.
Let's say it's too turbid. What can I do about that?
So the first thing would be to make sure it's too turbid, and we're going to use that Secchi disc, or at least use our hand underwater and kind of the same spot, the same time of day, and see how deep you can get. And if you identify that it's too turbid, if you want more water clarity, then you can do things, you can add things to your pond. And two of the most common things to add are gypsum and alum. The first thing I would recommend is doing a jar test. And so there are different kinds of jar tests. We've talked about jar tests for cyanobacteria, but this one's for sediment. So what you want to do is go take a sample of the water and just set it in your garage on a shelf for about 24 hours and come back and look at it and see if there's sediment that's settled on the bottom of your jar or if it's all mixed in. So if there is sediment on the bottom, that is indicative that there's some sort of physical action in your pond keeping things mixed up. And so if we could somehow stop that action, whether that's it could be aeration, it could be some sort of fountain, it could be a stream that's coming in a little bit too turbulent. If you can slow that down a little bit, that can help cut down turbidity. And this might take a few months, but that stuff should precipitate out. If the water still looks murky, evenly distributed, then the next step would be to put a little bit of alum or gypsum into the jar. You can they sell little containers of alum in the grocery store with the spices, right? And so that's a really good, cheap way to go get a little bit. Does not take much. I mean, you're talking just a tiny little pinch in that jar, and see if that clears it up. The alum and gypsum are positively charged, and most of the floating particles in a pond are negatively charged. So they kind of act like magnets. When they join together, they get too heavy, and so then they precipitate out, they fall out. So those are a couple of the things you can do. Another benefit of gypsum or alum is that they can bind with phosphates and nitrates. So they can kind of reset a pond. But remember, we want some turbidity in our pond. So if you just start adding these things and clear up your pond too much, that can cause issues too. So make sure you understand what's going on before you just go start throwing those things into your pond.
Are there any biological reasons that we might have suspended solids out in that pond?
Yeah, and so the biggest one, are certain fish species, and so bullheads are notorious for disturbing the sediment. When we start to get too many plants, one of the first things that people rush to are grass carp, right? And so grass carp are a tool. There are times when they may be beneficial, but grass carp do a couple things. One, they tend to grow really big. So grass carp can live like 50 years, right? Pretty long time. And when they start to get big, they swim around and they're, just a tail's moving around. A 50-pound fish can create a lot of havoc on the bottom of a pond on that sediment, so they can increase water turbidity. The other thing they tend to do is they really like to eat tender parts of the plant, but they're really picky. So they might take 5 bites and figure out that it's a little too stringy and spit it out and go take something else and keep doing that. And each of those little pieces can regrow. And so grass carp can be beneficial, but they might cause plants to spread. They might increase the turbidity. So kind of understanding the issue, what you're trying to solve before throwing them in would be, definitely something to consider.
What if it's too clear? What do we do about that?
The most common thing we do is add pond dye. And so you can add different kinds of clay. In aquaculture, it's common to add clay particles when fish are really small, and that kind of blocks their vision. A lot of fish, when they're really small, pursids, so walleye and perch are really common for this, will predate each other. They'll eat each other. And so, making sure that they can't see each other is important. But doing that on a large scale isn't quite as easy. And so commonly what we want to do is add pond dye. And pond dyes come in a lot of different colors. It's probably something we should spend a whole episode on because there are a lot of effects on what pond dye can do. But pond dye can decrease the depth that sunlight can pass through the water, right? And so when that happens, we're going to decrease the amount of sunlight hitting the bottom of a pond, and we can then potentially decrease the amount of plants that are growing. Now, remember earlier we chatted about what happens with high turbidity, right? And so if we know that with high turbidity, fish can't feed as well, there's not much research looking at pond dye and whether that same thing happens. And so some researchers think that you need the little particles, the clay particles, to physically block the site. And other researchers think that, if you have enough dye and you can't see in that water, it's effectively doing the same thing. The research, we don't really know, but it seems to make sense that that's at least a concern that we should take into account before we go putting dye into our water.
Once again, that was Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net if you'd like to listen to the full episode. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about interpreting feed labels with K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome, Shelby. Thanks for having me on.
Jason, this time of year, producers could be thinking about making some feedstuff purchasing decisions. And so what are some things that are really important for them to understand and interpret when it comes to feed labels and or tags?
Well, I think it's a really important topic that is always just good to go back and revisit because it's one of those topics where we know that it's important, but oftentimes understanding and being able to accurately determine and work through the information that's presented to a producer on a feed label is sometimes easily overlooked. And certainly when we think about getting into this time of year when a lot of folks are going to be making either protein or maybe energy supplementation decisions and thinking through feedstuff purchasing decisions, we know that can be really, really important. And of course, on the case of minerals, vitamins, and mineral supplements, a lot of folks are working through making those feeding and purchasing decisions now this time of year. So it's always good, I think, to just go back and revisit some of the key fundamental things with feed labels that we want folks to be able to keep in mind.
And what are a few of those key things that producers should be keeping in mind?
So I think it's important to always to go back and remember that we see a big difference there between what we would term as commercial manufactured products that a feed manufacturing company or an organization would be manufacturing for any customer or for any producer that would be out there that they would have the ability to be able to purchase, as well as custom products or custom formulated products. And when we talk about custom formulated products, we're referring to a product that a manufacturer or a blender is making, and that product is only going for one specific producer or one individual that they requested them to manufacture for them. And so we see some differences there, certainly with regards to those two general categories or general groups, if you will, in terms of the types of feed products that are out there. But, really when we think about it, the big things with feed labels that we always want to keep in mind as you work through that information, of course, the name and the address of the manufacturer is going to be on there. The type of product that we're going to be feeding is going to be on there. You're going to see some sort of guaranteed analysis and then a list of ingredients and feeding recommendations or feeding directions. And I think it's important for us to remember that feed manufacturers, regardless of where they're located, they have guidelines and regulations that they have to follow with in terms of how that information is laid out and produced on that feed label or on that tag. So they would work with both state and with federal guidelines and regulations there to make sure that they're putting that information out there on that tag that's in a clear manner. But then also too has all the required information, again, so that the producer or that the customer has a clear understanding of what that product is that they are purchasing, and it's clear what that product is intended to be used for. And I think that's a really fundamental thing there.
What are things that are commonly found on those tags?
We're always going to see a type of product there or a name for that product and a clear description of what that product is. So if it's a protein supplement, if it's a vitamin or mineral supplement, if it's a concentrated feed mix, it's going to be clearly stated there towards the top of that feed label of what that product actually is. And then we're going to see a guaranteed analysis, and there'll be a list of nutrients that are going to be included on that guaranteed analysis. And we're usually looking at things like protein, calcium, salt, potentially fiber components like ADF and NDF, depending on what the type of the feed is that's going to be manufactured, and certain other trace minerals, things like zinc and copper, manganese, if those products are added. So those types of things that we're going to see there, and there's going to be a guaranteed analysis that's going to be represented on that tag. And the reason for that is so that the consumer or the purchaser has a very clear understanding of the nutrient fortification within that product that they're going to be purchasing. And so, the big one that we typically think about are protein supplements. So when we think about, like, if we're going out and we're purchasing cubes, or if we're purchasing a mixed feed, it can even be a tub, regardless of the form of the product that's in. If it's a true protein supplement, that's the primary thing that it's going to provide for us. We'll see that as the first thing that's going to be listed there on that feed label.
Are there things that are listed differently, whether it's a custom label or a commercial label?
Absolutely. And so when we think about the commercial type products, if it's a commercially manufactured product, so if we have a feed manufacturer that's producing that product, and any customer, any producer that's out there can purchase that product, we're going to see a different set of information that's going to be on that feed label or on that feed tag versus if it's a custom product. And again, we think about those custom products, that's a product that only that one individual customer or producer is going to be able to purchase. And so the information that has to be on that is going to be different because it depends on the type of the feed that we're going to see there. So the main things that we're going to see on a custom label would, of course, be the name of the manufacturer, the manufacturer's address, and then the name of the producer that's going to be receiving that product, general description of what that feed might be. And then with regards to specific nutrients that would be listed on that feed product tag or that label, that's going to be dependent on what that producer or that customer has asked for to be put together. So, for instance, if they have a blend that they've requested and they spell out the specific amounts, let's just say, for example, on a per ton basis of 4 different ingredients, let's say it's dried distillers grains, corn germ meal, or corn gluten meal, and wheat middlings. Let's just say that it's a simple blend like that, and the producer has determined that they want a certain blend manufactured for them, and they specify the amount on a per ton basis or on a batch basis that they want to have blended into that product, and that's all that they want to have blended for them. That tag, that feed label that would accompany that product that's going to be manufactured by that blender or by that mill, if they blend that for them, then just that basic information stating the amount that is blended into that feed would all that they would need to have. That's all the information that they would necessarily need to have. They would not necessarily have to have a guaranteed nutrient analysis on that tag if that producer or that customer did not specifically request it. So it depends on what the request there is from that producer and what kind of information that they want to have on that product. Conversely, if that producer was to request a certain composition from a nutrient standpoint, if they're requesting that this product needs to be 16% crude protein, let's just say, and they want to use these 4 ingredients, well, then the manufacturer or the blender of that product is required to provide an analysis or to provide a label indication on that label, to provide an indication on that label that it's 16% crude protein. So it varies some with regards to what the request or the ask there is for that custom manufactured product. But those are really kind of the key differences there that we see with those products.
When might a producer want to look into doing custom feed?
Really, custom feeds can have a lot of general benefits for producers when we think about having the flexibility to put together a product or a feed a package that is specific for what they need, that sometimes may use some of their own ingredients that they might have on their own farm or ranch operation that they can take into a feed service provider and use and be incorporated into that feed. And certainly just to have flexibility with what they need. There's a lot of general advantages there for custom manufactured products. I think the thing that we always want to encourage with our producers is that we want them to make sure that they're having really good conversations with their feed service provider in terms of what their feed service provider can provide for them, the types of mixes and blends that they can do. And regardless if it's a protein supplement or a mineral supplement, being able to structure and put together that feed package so that it meets the needs of that individual producer, because we know that every operation is a little bit different, and being able to do that certainly has a lot of advantages. I think the key is being able to have a good conversation with that feed service provider and making sure that they can put together the product that you need for your operation, because every manufacturer, every mill's capabilities would be a little bit different. Certainly when we think about making things like mineral supplements versus larger bulk commodity feeds or mixed feeds, texturized feeds, those require a different process. And not every manufacturer can necessarily make every single type of feed that's out there. It depends on what their capabilities are. And so, again, going back to having that good conversation with that feed service provider, we feel is really appropriate to help everyone understand what the best product there is to meet the needs of everyone involved.
What are some of your resource recommendations for producers?
I think the big thing is again, just understanding that we really encourage producers to have that conversation with their feed service provider. Again, lots of good information and guidance that they can provide in terms of putting together what that custom product needs to be, or potentially if it's a commercial supplement as well too. And of course, we have a lot of information available on feed manufacturing and nutrient guidelines, nutrient recommendations, and how certain products will fit in to different operations. Of course, within the KSRE system as well too. Of course, KSUbeef.org is a great resource for producers as well too.
Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate it.
That was K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. Sustainability on the dairy farm involves both financial and environmental measures. To be more sustainable, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that producers can improve their calf operations to increase the rate of growth, which will increase milk production and reduce disease. Also continue to reduce their carbon footprint and control stressors on the dairy.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning sustainability. In our culture today, we hear a lot about sustainability, and as I think about the dairy industry over the last 3 or 4 decades, I think about the things we've done to increase our efficiency of milk production, increase our efficiency of heifer production, whether we look at individual animal production or just the number of heifers that we keep around for replacements. We've increased our overall farm efficiency so we can survive in the economic situation that we're currently going through. Our greenhouse gas production has actually been reduced when we look at it on a per gallon of milk or per pound of milk produced, not on a per cow basis. We've decreased our feed shrink significantly on many of our farms, and as a result, we've decreased our overall carbon footprint, particularly when you look at it on a per pound of milk or gallon of milk produced. So as we look to the future, what are some of the opportunities that we have to increase our sustainability? Well, one of the places I think you can look is your calf operation. We have many tools out there that will increase the rate of growth as well as increase the health of our baby calves. And this needs to start right away. We've learned a lot in the last couple of decades about how important that early growth is to make sure that we get good gain of weight as well as formation of the correct body structure. This will lead to an increase in milk production, decrease the amount of disease that we see in our calves, which will also reduce culling not only during the calf growing period, but also later on in life. This increases the lactation length, so we have longer life of our animals once they do come into the milking herd. If you haven't visited with your nutritionist about precision nutrition, I really encourage you to spend some time on that in the next few months. Typically, our Holstein herds today are shipping milk that is 4.1 to 4.2% fat. And I heard last week of a herd in Wisconsin that shipped a load of milk that was 5.3% fat with a 3.3 protein level. So as we think about that and how that increases our efficiency, a lot of that comes through nutrition. Yes, it's taken advantage of the genetics that we have bred for, but nutrition is an important part of that. So precision nutrition may be something that you need to concentrate on your farm to get those benefits that you've already invested in when it comes to the genetics on your farm. Overall, as we look at carbon footprint, we will continue to see pressure to reduce our carbon footprint as an industry. So when we look at some of the things that we can do there, again, increased production and increased components are part of that reduction process, but also how we eliminate plastics and some other things that increase our carbon footprint around the dairy will also become important. And last but not least, we need to look at how we control stressors on our animals, particularly in the lactation herd and particularly around transition time. We know a lot of those stressors are associated with nutritional decisions, environmental situations, as well as transport and movement of the animals. So there's much we can learn there that will help control things like ketosis and leaky gut syndrome in our early lactation cows. Doing this will increase our efficiency as we look at increased levels of milk production from these animals. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to embrace sustainability and look for ways that they can improve their operations through increased sustainability.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.